Alright, hello everyone and welcome today to what's going to be another episode of The Verdict. I am Spray and Pray 1000 and today we're going to talk about Final Fantasy Origin Stranger of Paradise. Actually, is this Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin? I forget. This is one of those games. It's like saying Namco Bandai and Bandai Namco. And I know at one point in time it was Namco Bandai, but maybe it's Bandai Namco now. Anyway. So that's a whole long story short. Stranger of Paradise is a third-person action-adventure game. It follows the Souls-like formula where, you know, it's a certain style of game. You have checkpoints you get throughout the level. Dying will cause you to drop your experience, basically, and you can have one chance to go get it back and stuff like that. And Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise mainly focuses on its combat with its job system. You play as Jack, who is essentially the main character of the story. I mean, you obviously play as the main character of the story, and Jack has the ability to switch between jobs on the fly. Now, one thing that I like about this game is the fact that it features a good chunk of Final Fantasy classes right off the bat. You have traditional classes that, like, such as Mage or Warrior or Black Mage, Thief and Monk, and all sorts of classes like that. And you can freely swap between these classes. You can have up to 2 classes on what's called a battle set, and each class has its own stamina gauge, and each class you equip separately from the other one, so that way you can build each one differently. You could have a bunch of different presets of classes at each checkpoint or in between missions that you can swap between, you know, for whatever's best or whatever suits your play style. And that is one thing that right off the bat I will give this game, is that it is very, very, very good at letting you pick and choose your play style. So for instance, I prefer a more up close, you know, melee style of gameplay. My friend who played this preferred a more slower paced, you know, more long range style melee, you know, backing in and out and stuff like that. But for me, I like to get up close. You know, I really sort of latched on to the fist weapons, which I think were pretty cool. And the different builds you could run in this game are pretty obvious, right? Like, it's pretty straightforward. By the end of the game, you could really channel a lot of those builds. And I think that really makes the game more enjoyable. I think it adds a lot to the replayability of it. So, to start, what is the story, right? Like, what is the basic setup and the premise of Stranger of Paradise? Well, you play as Jack, and Jack is joined by his friends, up to 4 friends, that accompany him on this journey. Essentially, it's like the story from Final Fantasy 1. However, if you've played Final Fantasy 1, you'll notice that certain things and characters are not who they appear to be, and things are off. And so basically, Jack and his friends' true goal is to defeat chaos and restore light to the realm of Cornelia. However, of course, along the way, there's a whole bunch of twists and turns. This is not as straightforward as Final Fantasy 1 is, being that it's a very old game. And along the way, they're going to encounter a lot of different friends, a lot of different allies, and it's a big conspiracy that Jack has to unravel while figuring out just who and where Chaos is so he can kill him. And without getting too in-depth in the plot, I will say that despite the story being, you know, having its twists and turns, but otherwise being very straightforward, told through a handful of cutscenes and being very basic at times, I did actually really enjoy, like, the final twists and the tie-ins to Final Fantasy 1. I actually think that this is one of the better, like, prequel companion pieces that I've seen, and I actually rather enjoyed a lot of it, especially some of the characterization. I think the characters are played off really well. Jack himself is a meme. Of course, everybody just knows him as Chaos Punching Man, but I do think that towards the end of the story, he definitely, you know, shows off more to his character than just, I want to kill chaos bad, which is really an unfortunate part of just, like, social media, that's all people really took away from the character, and then a lot of people just kind of didn't play the game. And I actually really liked it. Now, at times, it is very cringy. At times, it is very over the top. Part of it, I think, is the parody charm of just, you know, they wanted a character who, like, exemplifies a meme in essence. But I actually ended up liking Jack better than some Final Fantasy protagonists, just because, yeah, the game is set up to be both, you know, like a retrospective, but it's also set up to be like a parody at the same time. You know, a lot of things are satirical and over the top, just for zany scenes, you know, that are just silly and fun. And I actually like that. I think that really adds a lot, you know, when a game can sort of debase itself and make fun of its own series and stuff. It's kind of what I liked about Time Splitters, making fun of a lot of stuff. It's what I like, parody games. I like meme games that sort of go the extra yard and feel, comfortable taking knocks at different things. You know what I mean? So for me, I actually rather enjoyed a lot of it. Now, admittedly, I would say maybe there should be a little bit more story. I feel that if the game had maybe just a little bit more narrative to it, that could be good. But what's there isn't bad, and I think it's fine as it is. It's just the more that they add, it would be cooler, because I think it's actually a really interesting way that they take the game from being like this parody to actually giving it like a serious backdrop and a serious plot like halfway through the game. Conversely, I really like Jack. I think he's a fun character. I think he's more interesting than some of the other characters we've been getting in Final Fantasy games. So, for instance, like, I only really like Lightning because of Lightning Returns. I think that that's kind of like the last game from the Final Fantasy numbered series. I really thought that, like, turned things completely around. I'm ignoring 14, by the way. And so I kind of like that Jack throughout the game is kind of likable for one reason or another. Now, the story itself is very straightforward. If you've played Final Fantasy 1, you're going to recognize a lot of different locations from the game. However, a lot of these different locations come up because of they're basically references to older Final Fantasies. So if you've played a lot of Final Fantasies, you'll be able to say, oh, I remember this part from this game over here, or I remember this part. Basically every Final Fantasy from 1 to 15 gets referenced. And I think that that's really cool that they were able to find ways to tie in different areas. Now, some of them are not the most, like, memorable or amazing areas from their respective games, but some of them are pretty cool, and I actually got to give credit to that. Some of them are actually pretty cool, and I actually like that. And I won't spoil what areas are in where. I guess the gameplay will be in, so I mean, if you're watching this, unfortunately, like, I don't want to just have a blank screen. So I mean, if you could watch the Elgato no signal if you want, but I mean, it's not really good for a review. But I guess what I would say is the number one thing about this game that sets it apart from almost every other Soulsborne on the market is Soul Shield. Soul Shield is essentially, there's a guard button in this game. I ended up never using it because of Soul Shield. I'm sure there's ways to use it. I'm sure there's different reasons why you would, but I just ended up using Soul Shield. Basically what Soul Shield is in this game, attacking does not drain your stamina. However, Soul Shield and guarding will drain your stamina. Like with any other game, when you run out of stamina, you basically get broken, and what it means is that you fall to the ground for a few seconds and you're just unable to act. You're basically completely exposed. Conversely, this can also happen to enemies, and when it happens to enemies, you're able to walk up to them and perform a finishing move, which is called Soul Break, which then gives you more MP, it gives you some extra stuff and all that. And Soul Shield by far is the most innovative thing, because what will happen is that in this game you use MP to use abilities, so like 1 MP bar per ability usage. However, in order to gain MP, you have to use Soul Shield, so you have to block an attack with Soul Shield. Now, when using Soul Shield, you drop your stamina bar very quickly. So it's basically like a timed guard that will basically let you absorb an attack, parry it almost, and then allow you to keep some of that as MP. Now, certain attacks which have a purple bar will give you what's called an instant ability when you Soul Shield it. Usually these are related to the monster in question. So for instance, if a goblin throws a stone at you, right, you could Soul Shield it and it becomes Stone Toss, which you could then use to defeat enemies or to hurt people. And maybe even throw it back. If a wind elemental throws a volley of wind at you, then you could Soul Shield it and you'll gain like Aroga or something. Things like that I think really add to the replayability. I think it makes it very fun that you could do that and you could hold them, but if you get soul broken, not only do you lose all your buffs, but you also lose all of your any instant abilities you have. So there's a lot of risk reward. You definitely don't want to get broken if you can avoid it. Now, as I said before, you have 2 different battle classes on your battle set, and each battle set has a separate stamina bar. So obviously the idea would be that if your stamina bar gets low, while you wait for it to regen, switch to your other class and back off for a little bit or push the advantage, and then that way you can constantly go between the two and swap, you know, back and forth readily and all that. Beyond that, Stranger of Paradise, and I really will say this, like the buff system in this game is pretty cool. There's a lot of different abilities you get from mastering your classes. You gain experience every time you complete an enemy and do the usual stuff, but what really helps is when you can master a class, you go down each class's tree and you can unlock different abilities for you to use. The biggest example of which being, like, once you master a class at level 30, you have access to other abilities that you could then take over to other classes. There's like global abilities, there's active abilities, and then there's things that benefit like certain weapon types, certain different button combinations and all that. And I kind of like that because it means that each playthrough, each character every player will go through a different upgrade tree, right? So everyone starts off as a swordsman, but over time, you know, maybe someone might want to be a dragoon and use spears, and then someone else might want to use fists, and another person might want to use sword and board. And the thing that one of the biggest complaints I have about the class system is, unfortunately, there's no archery based classes. You know, Final Fantasy has like archery based stuff. You know, archer, hunter, sniper, you know, just adding those in and finding a way to make them work would have been really cool. It's unfortunate that they were just cut. I guess they couldn't figure out a way to make bows work, because there is a class for mages. Like, you are able to use mages, for instance, like white mage, black mage, red mage, sage is in the game, and unfortunately there's just no archer classes. Now, magic is a little bit weird in this game. You have a radial wheel that you could hold down a trigger for, and then you could use that to like summon forth different spells. So it's cool that they have all the elements in. You know, they have your typical fire, blizzard, and thunder, but they also have the more, you know, the less typical wind, lightning, and water, and dark and light, which I think is really awesome that they have all the elements. And it's cool that you can swap. I found magic to be a little bit cumbersome. I'm sure there's someone out there who really figured it out, but magic seems to be a little bit cumbersome. Now, I know that this game, you know, doesn't do like the whole slow down time thing or whatever when you're picking something, because this game actually has online co-op. Now, I did not have a chance to play it because I don't have Xbox Live. However, I will say that the magic is handled pretty well. From the little bit of it that I used, I thought it was interesting. Now, I didn't use it to really learn or practice anything. But that said, I thought it was pretty enjoyable and fun to use. Other than that, I would say that if I had to say two big complaints about this game, and they kind of almost go hand in hand, and this is where like I would dock most of the points off for this verdict. The first big complaint is that you yourself do not have an actual level system. The way your level is determined in this game is by an aggregate of gear that Jack is wearing. So whatever your level is your average item level between your two different classes. And I think that that's both a great idea and a bad idea. And here's why it's a bad idea. I know that they did it to really homogenize things and make it so you're not totally dependent on grinding and leveling. But ironically, the problem with the level up system in this game is that even though, you know, you could get gear and whatever, you have to go into levels basically under leveled, then like, you know, mess around in there for like an hour or so, get gear from that area, and then go back and like actually beat the level. And that kind of ties into the second part, which I'll get into in a minute. But the real thing I hate is that, like, you could play the shit out of the last level, come to the next level, and still be underleveled. Which means that you might as well, like, at some point you're going to have to go into these levels under-geared, which I think is a big no-no for a game like this. And the reason I say that is because when you go into a level where you're under the level, you know, there's a little warning marker above it and everything, and it says, oh, you're level 82 and this is level 100, you know, 100 level, right? Enemies will have an easier time soul breaking you. They'll have an easier time depleting your stamina gauge. You know, if they hit you, they'll deal more damage, right? And I think that like, and you basically deal less soul damage to them. If they remove that, this game would be way better. If you could break enemies with reliable consistency, even at a lower level, I guess you could argue maybe the game would be easier, but I also feel like you're punished for, like, just playing the game in a sense, because there's no way around getting a higher level. Now, this could be remedied with the other thing that a lot of Neo games do, well, there's only 2 Neo games, I don't know why I said it like that, but this could be remedied by the fact that the game throws a lot of loot at you. So you might say, oh, okay, well, I could desynthesize loot that I don't want and then use it to increase the level of loot that I do want. And sadly, this game does not operate like that. You cannot take other pieces of loot and then use them, you know, through either breaking it down or whatever. You cannot use them then to increase and improve something else that you're making. And I think that that's probably like the biggest L this game holds, is that you cannot like break down, like the upgrade system is effectively worthless. I never used it throughout my whole playthrough. So while it's still serviceable and it doesn't make the game impossible, it means that like I felt more comfortable just running through each level and then just getting to the big enemies and figuring out how to kill each enemy, as opposed to like actively like fighting everything, especially as you get towards the end of the game where this gets a little more out of control. The way that you rectify this situation is twofold. One, make it so that there's an experience system and maybe your gear gives you bonus levels or something, right? But Jack himself will have a level system that lets him, if you play the same level over and over and over again, you gradually increase your own soul level, or I'm sorry, your own level, and then that way you could just go in, you could soul break enemies as normal, because that's really the main gameplay of this game, is being able to soul break and defeat enemies and do everything yourself. That's really the main point of the game, is that you can actually, you know, participate in a fight. You can soul break, back and forth and whatever. But not being able to do that is just kind of unfortunate, and it's a lame. And two, just make it so you can upgrade gear, right? Like how many games let you descent, like Dynasty Warriors does it, right? Like you could descent a bunch of stuff and then use it to upgrade the pieces you do care about. Very simple, very straightforward, would easily rectify a lot, you know, with the game. And unfortunately, that's one thing that they're missing out on, and it really, that by far holds the game back a lot, in my opinion. It'll make the last couple of stages in the game very, very, very fun to play, as opposed to just like, well, how can I cheese every encounter in order to beat the game? Especially, you know, since this is meant to be a hard game. Now, granted, they did add an easy mode, right? Easy mode's different if you want to drop difficulties from action to easy. There's also a hard mode in the game as well, but in easy mode you don't lose MP when you die, right? When you die on action, which is what I played, which is basically normal mode, you lose 1 MP when you die, down to a minimum of 2. You also, and it's like the default difficulty, but the biggest thing is that you lose MP, which means you have to change your strategy, you have to soul shield to get it back and stuff like that. And like, I don't mind a good punishing game. I'm not like a super huge diehard fan of Souls games, okay? But at the same time, I will say that this game definitely should like have a bit of a fixed system around that. I think it would make it more like you want the right amount of reward for investment. But with that said, I mean, other than that, that's like the biggest thing wrong with the gameplay that I could think of, is like there's no way for you to increase your gear, and the level system is kind of skewed. If they just tweaked a couple things about that and, you know, did whatever, I feel like this game would have really solid gameplay. You know, depending on what weapon you use, you know, each weapon plays a bit differently. You have big swords, you have spears, you have maces, you have swords and shields, you have axes, right? You have all sorts of crazy stuff that I really think is enjoyable in this game to use. My personal favorite ended up being the fist weapons. The fist weapons basically are really, really fast, and when you combine them with certain effects, class abilities, and whatnot, then you get like bonus attacks. Like you get bonus things. You get stun lock enemies. You can deal a lot of damage really fast if you're hitting a weak point and stuff like that, which is kind of cool because it kind of reminded me of Bravely Default a little bit with that. And also Final Fantasy 3, but that's besides the point. I would say that the biggest thing is that each weapon has like a different like combo system. So for instance, you know, if you hit a normal attack once and then hit your trigger, what will happen is you could do one type of attack, and you could set this, and then if you do maybe 2 normal attacks and then hit trigger, you'll do another attack. And there's different things you could do, like tap forward while attacking and then into a move. After parrying, you could do a riposte move. There's a bunch of different things that you could play around with and use, just basically to beat the game and to fight enemies. And I really like that there's diversity, right? Like, you're not just mashing right bumper over and over and over and over and over. There's actually like weapon skills and weapon arts that you could use to really, you know, ham it up and play it differently, right? Your 2 teammates, Jack has 4 friends, but he can take up to 2 different people with him into combat. I think that's pretty cool. I actually really like that. It means that you're not just fighting an entire legion of enemies by yourself. Sometimes they could help out. Other times they rarely get in the way. I wouldn't say like they actually like hurt you in any way. Sometimes they could make things really easy. Like, they actually put in work, but they have their own set of healing items, and if they use them all, they will get downed like you would. Oh, well, you don't get downed, you just die. But, like, they do get downed, and you can revive them, either by exiting combat or by using one of your own potions to revive them. You could basically command your teammates to use their moves and stuff like that. Now, the one thing I wish you could do is give orders to them, like, back off or head in. You know what I mean? Like, there's no way you could give them orders and tell them what to do. So a lot of times they'll walk into attacks. A lot of times they'll get grappled by enemies, right? I actually forgot to mention this earlier. Some attacks cannot be soul shielded, such as grapples. Those attacks are outlined in red. Basically, the enemy just grabs you and does a quick animation for a good amount of damage. Those can't be soul shielded and blocked. You have to dodge them. You could do either a quick dodge or a full roll by double tapping, which is also nice. And yeah, I like that you could also customize your controls in this game. That's becoming a more common thing amongst games, and I actually like it, because it means that I just hate pushing the B or the circle button. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like it's so out of the way, especially when you're trying to manage the camera stick. I just feel like it's just very unfortunate that the B button has to be all the way out there like that. But yeah, that's about all I would say for that. So otherwise, graphically, this game looks really good. I mean, it's typical. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. There are a few things. I think some of the cutscenes look a little weird, because I really think that's because this is a multi-plat game. But other than that, like, the sounds are really good. The music is just slamming. You know, Final Fantasy is one of those famous series for its music, and nothing has changed about that here. Yeah, other than that, I mean, I would just say that this game has a very solid all-around presentation. If you're looking for a Soulsborne game, if you're looking for a Final Fantasy game, I mean, I don't think you could go really wrong with this game. I think it's a very enjoyable game for what it is, and I actually really enjoyed my time playing it. Now, that said, I wish there was a little more. It is only about 30 hours, but for those 30 hours, I had some of the most fun I've ever had on a Soulsborne game. Yeah, there's times where it's really difficult because of the level system and the gear system. Trying to get the right gear that has the right affinity, which is another thing I didn't mention. Each job, you can build up your affinity towards it, up to 400. At certain markers on the way from 0% to 400, you will get like bonuses towards your class, and these, especially towards the end of the game, can be very helpful. So they can range from being able to use your ability that normally you could only use at low health 100% of the time, to being immune to status ailments and things like that. And needless to say, that's pretty helpful. But the problem with this, again, goes back to the gear system, where the gear system, you might have an item that, is your affinity and a really good chunk of your affinity at level like 80. But when you get to level 100, you might want to say, okay, well, I have to pick between my affinity or a gear piece, that fits my, that would raise my level. And I think that if you could add a way to upgrade the abilities and gear that you already have, you wouldn't have to make such a decision that could actually alter your gameplay. Because for me, by the end of the game, I had a certain, gear set. I was like, I don't want to exchange pieces for things I don't have. I don't want to lose my affinity, right? Like, what's the point then? I would just be nerfing myself for no reason. I'd be nerfing myself harder than if I were to just try to beat the level with under-leveled. And I wish that they could change that. But ultimately, what would I give Stranger of Paradise? As much as I like it, the gameplay systems in the two major areas are pretty big, and I wish that they were a little bit better in that regard. I'm going to give Stranger of Paradise a 90 out of 100. I wish it was a little bit better in those regards, and I certainly wish that a lot of the enemies and a lot of the things just wouldn't just flat out steamroll you if you weren't if you weren't like gear level restricted. Other than that, I had an amazing time. I absolutely enjoyed the game from start to finish. It was very fun, it was very comical, but it also had a pretty good story at the end, and I really like how it ties into the game it's supposed to be, you know, the origin story of. So for what it's worth, I really enjoyed Final Fantasy Origin, and Stranger of Paradise is a very, very well done game. It's just a shame I think a lot of people kind of phoned it in and just skipped it. One, because of Elden Ring, and two, because of the memes. And I really hope that, you know, with either the DLCs or something, that people can actually be convinced to take a look at it, because it's actually a really well done game, and I actually really enjoyed it more than some of the other Soulsborne games I played. So in that regard, I'm SNP1K 1000. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you next time on The Verdict.